Well now, good evening, my friends. You've found your way to Willow Cove, a quiet little seaside town that still believes in gentle stories, steady light, and the kind of kindness that lingers after the lanterns go out. If this place feels a bit like home to you, you're welcome to stay a while. You can even subscribe, so you don't miss the next tale when it drifts in on the fog. And if you'd like to share a bit of warmth in return, well, you can tip Grandpa a cup of tea. The link's tucked down there in the description. It helps keep the lanterns glowing and the stories brewing. Now then, shall we begin tonight's tale? The Lantern Walk at Willow Cove. Every October I take the ferry from Starling Bay across to Willow Cove for the Lantern Walk. The same creak of the dock, the same chatter of gulls, the same feeling that the sea remembers me and forgives me a little more each year. This time, the fog behaved like an old friend. And a small companion, memory itself, I suppose, found my hand. By late October, Willow Cove remembers how to breathe. The tide lowers its shoulders, the gulls trade cries for soft glides of wing, and the light, the light, loosens its grip on the day as if we were returning a borrowed book. On the final evening of the month, the town prepares for the Lantern Walk, a custom older than any fence post or church bell in these parts. A ritual the sea itself seems to pause for just to listen. Candles line the cliffside trail to guide us all home. Fishermen and bakers, widows and dreamers, those who've lost their way in thought and those who only wish to remember that the world is still gentle. I've kept this night for most of my life. Some call me Arthur Linden, though in these parts I'm mostly known as Lantern. My cottage sits halfway between the harbor and the headland, a quiet slope where rosemary leans inland and the windows know how to hold a view without showing off. Inside, I keep a cupboard full of tin lanterns with star-cut lids, each mended more than a few times and proud of it. When they're lit, the light spills through like constellations underfoot, small wandering stars for the weary to follow. This year, the fog arrived early, settling over the cove like an understanding guest, soft, unhurried, willing to listen. I set my old wicker basket on the table, the one my father made when his hands were still more rope than bone, and I counted candles. The beeswax carried the faint sweetness of summer, reminding me that pumpkins on porches and cinnamon in ovens owe their joy to long months of unseen labor. From the harbor below came the steady call of the buoy bell, slow, contented, faithful as breath. Somewhere in the cluster of cottages, a kettle sang, then sighed itself quiet. I packed the candles, a loaf of the baker's cinnamon bread still warm from the oven, and 2 mugs wrapped in a towel for cocoa later. Evenings like this deserve a cup you can hold against your chest when the wind writes its name across your knuckles. Before I left, I did what I always do, opened the window just a little and told the room where I was going. It's good manners to speak to the place that keeps you. The room breathed back, of soap, wood, and rosemary, and I felt that steady patience that comes when everything in your life knows how to be itself. Outside, the lane wore its carpet of gold and red leaves. Pumpkins on stoops smiled their crooked smiles. Children in wool caps carried paper lanterns on twine, shepherded by parents speaking in soft tones, out of respect for the small flames glowing inside the gourds. The baker, still dusted in flour, leaned out his doorway and offered me a small paper bag. "For later, Arthur," he said, slipping in a handful of sugared nuts like a secret between friends. At the cliff, the first lanterns were already burning, set there by the lighthouse children, Emmett and Lena. They know how to be careful without being stern. The fog swallowed them gently, made their lights seem larger like halos on the earth. I lifted one, struck a match, and watched as the star pattern leapt across the grass and onto my boots. Every year, I'm surprised again at how a small light can teach the dark to be hospitable. "Evening, Lantern," Emmett called, his voice bright and sure, carrying that kindness only youth can make sound effortless. Lena waved both arms high, laughter tucked behind her grin, then hid her hands under her chin the way children do when they're afraid their joy might spill. "Evening," I called back, my voice lighter now. "The fog's in a generous mood tonight." "It likes holidays," Lena said, half whisper, half secret. It told me so. We worked mostly in silence, setting the lanterns one by one along the narrow trail, a path that sometimes thinks about being cliff, then changes its mind. The sea below kept its own rhythm, counting waves like heartbeats. The lanterns, once lit, sat patiently in their glow, asking nothing more than to be kept out of the wind. When we reached the old hawthorn where the path dips and the brave sometimes hesitate, I stayed there. It's been my post for years. There's a small bench I built from driftwood, and it's learned to welcome whoever pauses to rest. Tonight I spread my wool blanket across it and set the basket beside me. The air was full of bread, sugar, salt, and leaf. I lit my own star-lidded lantern last. The flame climbed the wick like a boy climbing a stair, then settled into its pool of light with the kind of patience that makes you feel younger than you are. The lantern walk had begun. They call my lantern the last light. There are a few more beyond it, of course. Fishermen's headlamps, porch candles, the stubborn window lamps that refuse to be practical. Mine is simply the last one belonging to the shared path, the final punctuation at the edge of evening's sentence. I've never minded that. I've always been comfortable being a semicolon in a world of exclamation marks. The first walkers came in small clusters, their laughter low, the kind you hum without noticing. They carried their own lanterns, some freshly made, others older than their hands, pumpkins with careful teeth, tins punched with stars and moons, paper globes painted with shy ghosts that only haunt you as long as you look at them. They greeted me the way people greet a familiar bench or a kettle or a kindly old cat, with gratitude and without ceremony. A trio of teenagers followed, cloaked in old curtains for capes. They moved through the fog as if the night were a stage and they'd learned to play their parts softly. Big gestures made small, voices tuned to mist, eyes bright with mischief that meant no harm. One left a dried orange slice beside my lantern for luck. Another slipped a folded note beneath the base. Some words prefer to keep their own counsel. The third asked if I'd seen the moon yet, then blushed when the fog answered in her place. "Another night," I told her. "The moon's a creature that doesn't like to be rushed." The baker's wife appeared next, a basket on her arm filled with honey-brushed buns. She left 3 on my bench, knowing I'd share them with wandering hands, and maybe keep one for the walk home. "For the brave," she said, which around here means anyone who's come out at all. Soon came old Whit, the boat mender, his dog Parson trotting beside him. Parson listens more than he barks, which is why he's so liked. Whit walked with the unhurried gait of a man who's taught not to behave and learned patience from the rope itself. He tipped his cap, set a coil of rope on the bench. "Just in case somebody's lantern wants a leash," he said, and moved on, Parson's tail writing the word yes in fog behind him. By and by, a young mother paused with a pram, adjusting the shawl around her sleeping child. She rested a hand on the lantern's handle and smiled. "When I was little," she said, "I thought these cutout stars were the ones that got lost from the sky. I believed we gave them work so they wouldn't be sad." "They do like to be useful," I told her. The baby sighed as if agreeing, and the wheels went on, blessed by small round light. I cupped my hands around a mug of cocoa and listened to the path. You can hear footsteps long before you see a face. The sound travels through grass into the wooden bones of the bench and along the brass handle of the lantern to your palm. Years teach you to recognize a walker by that preamble. The cautious steps of someone deciding something, the quiet laughter of someone remembering why they matter, the measured rhythm of sorrow trying not to break anything on its way through. Tonight the footsteps sounded mostly like people who had remembered precisely on time that they belonged to one another. The fog thickened until even the hawthorn bowed. I shifted the lantern closer to the edge of the bench so its star pattern spilled onto the narrowest part of the path. That's when I felt a presence at my knee. Noticed not first with my eyes, but with that part of the heart that recognizes a quieter breath. "Hello," a small voice said, steady as a lighthouse beam. "My cat has opinions about fog." I looked down, then to the right, because small voices usually bring small companions that don't stand where you expect. Half behind the hawthorn stood a child in a blue sweater, watching me with that serious interest children reserve for stories they want to understand properly. In her arms, a tabby cat surveyed the world as though it had designed most of it and was open to suggestions. "Does your cat have opinions?" she asked. "Only when I tell him my secrets," I said. Then he rolls onto his back, which I take as a sign my secrets aren't too terrible. She nodded thoughtfully. "Ours believes fog is a blanket with no bed. He thinks that's a design flaw." I offered them a seat. The cat jumped up first, circled once, and settled with its tail over its nose like punctuation. The child stayed standing, a sign she meant to go soon and wanted no ceremony in leaving. "I'm Arthur," I said, though most folks call me Lantern. "I'm Alice," she replied, "and this is Mr. Bartleby." She looked down as if expecting him to bow. He did not, but he blinked the long, polite blink cats use when they approve of your existence. "We live by the ferry dock, the house with the blue door. We were headed to the lookout to count waves, but Mr. Bartleby's reconsidering the math." "Quite right," I said. "Waves only allow themselves to be counted when they're in the mood to be understood." She smiled into the fog, that soft, lean children have when the night likes them back. "My grandmother says fog is the sea's way of hugging the land." "Your grandmother's a wise woman." I raised the lantern so its stars through a wider path. "Would you care to walk a bit with me? This is the narrow bend. It helps to have two pairs of eyes, and at least one cat opinion." She considered. Mr. Bartleby twitched a whisker as if casting a vote, then settled again. "All right," she said, "but if the fog turns into a library, we should whisper." "Understood," I said. And so we set out together, the lantern low, its light catching our feet instead of the future, which is the better way to walk on the edge of anything. The path accepts new feet the way a familiar story accepts a new reader, with a kind of untroubled gladness. Alice walked at exactly the pace of her curiosity, pausing when pausing was wise and moving forward when moving forward was kind. Mr. Bartleby devoted himself to the study of grass tips, occasionally endorsing a lantern with a gentle head bump, his quiet way of saying he approved. "Do you do this every year?" Alice asked. "Yes," I said, "and every year. It feels like the first time, just a little." "Is that because the fog changes its mind?" she asked. "That," I said, "and because people do." We reached the place where the cliff slips a little and rights itself, a scar carved by weather long before we could name it. I set the lantern down and placed the coil of rope Whit had left against a thorny root, just in case the ground wanted company. Alice leaned over the small dip as if treasure might be waiting, while Mr. Bartleby inspected a leaf to make sure it hadn't made any poor decisions. "What do you wish for on lantern night?" she asked. I could have said rest that doesn't quarrel, or courage that minds its manners, or maybe a kitchen that understands winter. But wishes prefer to be honest. "I wish," I said, "that people go home tonight feeling as if they've been given a small invisible blanket they can carry inside them." She looked up at the sky's soft, uncertain promise. "I wish," she said, "that the sea is never lonely, not even on Tuesdays." "That's a fine wish," I said, and I meant it, with the whole of me. The family approached, the youngest in front, holding a paper lantern painted with a yellow crescent. The father carried a thermos the size of a generous opinion, and the mother walked with the balance of someone who's learned both decking and decisions. They greeted us. The little one asked if our cat wanted a sugared nut. Mr. Bartleby, an expert in restraint, permitted a sniff, and refused, on principle, to eat it. "Mr. Bartleby is fasting," Alice said solemnly, as if cats kept holy days we did not. "Of course," said the mother, and they moved on, their lantern drawing the fog into a faint smile. As the path widened, voices began to travel more easily. Snatches of conversation braided with the sea's low hum. People spoke of ordinary things with the reverence of a blessing, of a neighbor who built a fence-side library and learned that children are brutally honest critics, of the postmistress who lit a small lantern for every undeliverable letter, so lost words might rest somewhere warm, and of the lighthouse keeper who wrote letters to the light itself through a long winter, and learned in the writing that being steady is its own kind of love. The fog listened to all of it and folded everything in, offering no opinion other than presence. Presence, after all, is a good opinion to have. We stopped near the hawthorn where the branches made a low arch. I poured cocoa into 2 mugs and handed one to Alice. She wrapped both hands around it, careful as a conservator. We let the chocolate steam soften our faces and the cinnamon mend what it could of a long month in early autumn. "Mr. Bartleby is not fasting from cocoa," she announced. I filled a small saucer, which he ignored, and later adopted as a pillow. Cats dislike generosity that arrives exactly when asked. Footsteps, slow and unsteady, and came toward us. They belonged to an old man in a weathered coat that had long ago stopped arguing with the wind. He carried no lantern. The fog lit him anyway. "Evening, Arthur," he said. "Evening, miss." "Evening, Reed," I answered. "Your hands look cold." "They are," he said, "but they've been cold before." He sat on the bench I'd placed years ago. The bench remembered him and sighed into its role. "Reed is not a man to be hurried. He's fixed more fences than most men have opened gates. He's taught wood to say yes, without minding that it used to be a tree." He studied the lantern's star pattern. "I used to think these holes were for letting the dark out," he said. "Then I got older and realized they're for letting the light get loose." We passed him a mug. He sipped and made that small sound people make when a good sweetness reaches the right part of the mouth. He told Alice about the year the fog forgot itself and ran home, leaving moonlight so thick on the path that people walked with their mouths open, catching it, then feeling shy about being seen that happy. Alice listened with both ears, which is one more than usual. When Reed had warmed, he stood, rested a hand on the lantern's handle, and said softly, "Good work." It's wise to compliment the tool as much as the hand that holds it. He nodded to us and continued on, the fog parting for a neighbor with a heavy basket. "Do some people walk without lanterns?" Alice asked. "Some do," I said. "It's good to have your hands free, for the surprise of kindness." She held the mug close and looked down the line of small flames bobbing gently as the path curved. "I think the lanterns are walking us," she said. "Quite possibly," I answered, and we went on, careful now not to get ahead of our own feet. There's a spot along the cliff where the path widens, then pauses at a little rise that believes itself to be the prow of a ship. The lanterns seem to gather there, resting for a moment as if they were breath. Children like to make wishes in that place. Older folks let the wishes come find them. Tonight the fog had drawn itself thin, as if it knew when to be respectful, leaving room for what needed space. When we arrived, the baker stood with his hat in hand. The boatmender had Parsons' leash looped twice around his wrist, and the postmistress carried a small bundle of letters tied with blue ribbon. The children clustered near the outermost lanterns, holding their pumpkins like the hearts of forest creatures who had agreed to be seen. The sea sent its constant, gentle message up to meet us. It always says the same thing, and the thing is always enough. Alma, the innkeeper from Starling Bay, a woman with a voice that can teach a house to listen, stood beside a table someone had carried out, set with a kettle, a jar of honey, and an enamel bowl filled with shells. A small handwritten card explained the ritual in a calm, generous hand. Take a shell. Hold it until it remembers a thank you. Place it by a lantern. The fog will deliver it to where it belongs. No one questioned the fog's ability to run errands. Fog carries authority better than any official stamp. Alice chose a shell with a little spiral that looked like a galaxy taking a nap. She tucked it into her palm and whispered something to it, Mr. Bartleby listening with one ear and pretending not to. I picked one shaped like an ear and held it up to the fog. The sound inside was convincing enough to make me smile. The postmistress untied her ribbon and placed a single letter beneath the lantern closest to the path's edge. "For the undeliverable," she said softly. "They deserve a good view." The baker poured hot water over tea, and we all stood nearby without the tyranny of conversation. There are people who can share silence without making it heavy, and Willow Cove seems blessed with more than its share. Parson leaned his head against a child's knee for part of that silence, then against mine for another portion, weighing both and finding them adequate. When it felt right, we each placed our shells by different lanterns. You could feel gratitude loosen something in the fog, as if it were enjoying itself. Alice set hers beside a lantern whose star pattern was especially bold, the kind that paints the path and half a person if you stand in the right spot. "Thank you," she said to it. I didn't ask whether she meant the shell, the lantern, the night, or all of them braided together. As the small ceremony settled into quiet, Wit began a story about a Halloween long ago when the ocean returned a boat that had gone missing in summer. It came in by starlight, its hull scuffed but unbroken, nets neatly raveled as though patience itself had been mending them. No one claimed it. The boat belonged to the water. They left it on the shingle with a lantern in its bow, and by morning the tide, having finished what it meant to do, took it back out as if to say, "Thank you for the loan." Alma smiled into her cup. "I've discovered the sea runs a very fair lending library," she said. The postmistress nodded. The fog, which prefers understatement, said nothing at all. We made room on the bench for a young couple, damp with the awkwardness of something not yet said. They sipped tea and slowly regained their weather. An older woman chose a shell and held it a long time, then tucked it into her coat pocket and wrote a note in a small book, as if tonight it was wiser to keep her thank you surprised. I respect that. Not everything needs a public ritual to be real. When the kettle was nearly empty, Alma refilled it with water from a thermos and relit the little burner beneath it. "Carry warmth forward," she said to no one in particular. People did. You could see hands loosen on mugs, shoulders dial down into something peaceful. You could almost see the lanterns admit they were proud of their work. "Shall we continue?" I asked Alice. "We shall," she said, in the voice of a small captain elected by a benevolent committee of cats. We walked on. The lanterns walked us. Mr. Bartleby accepted the promotion to forward scout with the gravity of a cat who's always known he would one day take command, preferably before the saucers were cleared. Past the promontory, the path narrowed again, sliding into a corridor of hawthorn and beach plum that in spring perfumes the air so deeply you could eat the morning without bread. Now the branches were bare, their shapes outlined by fog so delicately that even the thorns looked untroubled. The lanterns gathered closer in this stretch, conferring in low circles of light as if comparing notes. We came upon a boy standing very still. Stillness looks different on children, like an idea being considered by the whole body at once. He held a tin lantern of his own, a moon punched on one side and a star on the other. His eyes were busy with thought, but his face was not afraid. He saw us and did not move. "Are you well?" I asked. He nodded, then shook his head, then settled on a small shrug. The kind that means the sea is big and I am small, and both are true. Alice understood the grammar of it and did not crowd his pause. Mr. Bartleby arranged himself at the boy's feet, tail curled in the universal symbol, "For you may lean on me, but only if you understand I'm allowing it." "My father's boat is out," the boy said at last. "I know the walk is to guide them home, but I can't see anything from here. It feels like being helpful and not helpful." "That," I said, "is how helpfulness often feels. It's also how love feels when it's working properly." He lifted his lantern and turned it so the moon side faced the sea. "I wanted to send the light farther," he said. "I thought if I turned it just right, the stars would go through." "The fog is thicker than it looks," I told him, smiling. "But it's clever. If you tell the fog what you want the light to say, it'll carry the message." He studied me, then the fog, deciding which of us seemed more likely to keep promises. "If I say it," he asked, "will it work?" "Eventually," I said, "because that's the only answer I trust for wishes. But you might not see it working with your eyes." He nodded, bent close to the lantern, and began to whisper, not for secrecy, but because a big voice would have been untrue. When he finished, he wove the handle through his fingers and stood a little straighter, not older, just in better conversation with his hope. Alice and I waited until the fog resumed its usual shape. Mr. Bartleby flicked one ear, then the other in quiet applause. The boy looked toward the invisible horizon, then back to the path, which knows how to be horizon when needed. "Thank you," he said, and walked on, less alone. We followed, our lantern's stars stenciling reassurance on the ground. After a dozen slow paces, the wind shifted, coming from the south, warm as a kitchen someone loved. You could smell oranges where there were none, and beneath the sea's patient drum, a sound like cloth being shaken gently. People looked up, that animal flicker passing through them, the one that says something's different but we don't need to be afraid. There, in the fog to the left, a glow answered our line of lanterns, not bright, not near, but in the language of the night, close enough. Another glow, and then another. Headlamps maybe, boat lights possibly, or perhaps the fog was just playing kindly with the wishes we'd given it. I don't argue when the world chooses poetry over proof. Alice squeezed my sleeve. Mr. Bartleby pretended not to notice and allowed his tail to uncurl another inch. The boy ahead walked on, and I could see his shoulders learn a new verb, believing. We turned one last bend before the lookout. Wind there can make a man reconsider his hat, his past, or his opinion of geese. Tonight it behaved like a polite usher, opening the door with a gloved hand, asking for no tickets. At the lookout, the villagers had laid 2 long planks across the rocks, a bench big enough for a dozen and a cat. Lanterns circled it, and someone had left a lidded pot of cider with a note. "Leave what you don't need. Take what fits." I poured for Alice and for myself, set a small lid on the ground for Mr. Bartleby, who sniffed it, declined, and placed one paw in the steam, for reasons known only to religious orders of cats. People came and went. The boy's mother arrived, her face arranged with careful calm. The postmistress stood with her ribboned letters, chose one, read it silently, then tucked it into her coat. Alma folded a tablecloth someone had forgotten, the fabric quietly accepting its usefulness. Whit told Parson a joke so softly that only dogs were allowed to laugh. The baker's wife cut a loaf and slid the slices beneath a towel, like warm commas teaching a paragraph how to breathe. When the cider pot was nearly empty, I lifted our lantern and, because it felt right, held it high. Alice did the same, and the two star patterns crossed, making a small map of possibility. Others raised theirs, and for a moment the fog pretended to be sky, and we pretended to be stars. It was enough. "Shall we go home?" I asked. "I think we already are," Alice said. And for the second time that night, I agreed with everything in me. The walk back is always slower, as if the night itself has taught us how to move with the same careful generosity it prefers. People peel away toward their lanes, their gates, their softly waiting doors. The lanterns remain behind, to see the last walker safely into the village, then find their way to porches where they'll be welcomed, snuffed, polished, and put away again with the grace due to tools that have done their work well. We came upon Reed once more, his grandson holding his elbow, telling him a story about a bat who got lost and slept for 3 days on a carving of a bat, thinking it was his mother. Reed laughed softly, and I could see how the sound gentled the fog, like a knife being wrapped in cloth. At the narrow bend, I returned the coil of rope to the hawthorn root, thanked it for behaving, and placed a sugared nut on the soil, in case the plant kept accounts. Alice solemnly emptied the rest of the bag beside the bench, for whoever needs a small victory at the next sitting. Mr. Bartleby approved the offering by ignoring it completely. We reached my station, the last light. I set the lantern on the bench to cool. The star pattern slid across the wood and lingered, as if having done its rounds, it too preferred to rest. People passed, fewer now, their good nights practicing how to become tomorrow's good mornings. The fog lifted a little, revealing a row of harbor windows, each one with a lamp set carefully to align the sky with itself. I've always trusted people who place lamps in windows. It means they've chosen to learn the language of ships, even if they never leave the dock. "Do you live alone?" Alice asked, polite enough to frame the question without poking. "I live with the sea," I said, "sometimes with a kettle, a rosemary plant, and a book. Sometimes with company who remember where the mugs are." She considered this answer and tucked it away. "We should go home now," she said. "Mr. Bartleby has to tell the chair about his discoveries." "Chairs enjoy travelogues," I said. "They cannot move much, but they keep very good maps." We walked to the start of her lane. Her blue door shone through the fog, paint holding its own small insistence on sky. The porch light wore a shawl of moths in sensible colors. I knelt so my eyes met hers. "Thank you for helping with the narrow bend," I said. the lanterns like an extra pair of hands. She nodded, serious. "And thank you for telling the fog my wish," she said, as if I had been the courier. "I think Mr. Bartleby might design a better blanket for it." "I look forward to next year's model," I said. Her grandmother opened the door and waved. The woman's eyes had that quiet shine, the kind that comes when someone has seen a child come home whole. "Tea?" she called. "We have cinnamon." "Tomorrow," I called back. "Tonight the lanterns need to be put to bed." Alice hugged Mr. Bartleby, the sort of hug cats tolerate when the calendar demands ceremony. She went inside. The door closed. The blue remained, which is what colors do when they're anchored by love. I turned back toward the bench, gathered the lantern and the mugs, and set off for my cottage. The path, relieved of so much responsibility, seemed to unwind its shoulders. The hawthorn rustled a good night, or perhaps that was the sound of the night-speaking tree. At the lane that holds my house, I paused and looked back. The cliff glowed with a line of small suns all the way to the lookout, where even the final lantern stood not as a sentinel, but as a friend. Inside, the room greeted me with its old wood voice. I set the lantern on the table and blew gently until the flame slipped into its little sleep. The star pattern folded, the brass cooled, the glass held the memory of fog like a fingerprint. I poured the last of the cocoa and sat by the window. The sea was a darker shade of kindness than earlier, but kindness nonetheless. I imagined the boy's father feeling the fog's new wind and adjusting his hand on the tiller. I imagined the undeliverable letter warming itself in the postmistress's coat pocket. I imagined Reed home, his coat hanging by the door like a brave flag retired to a quiet post. On the sill was a bowl of small things gathered from the tide line: green glass, a feather, a coin so old it had forgotten math. I took from my pocket the shell I'd used earlier and placed it there. It shone just enough to tell me it hadn't finished being grateful. The room had one last task for me. On the shelf by the stove is a linen-bound book, its pages kept for the lantern walk alone. Each year I write only a handful of lines, no more than would fit on a label tied to a jar of preserves. I opened to tonight's page and wrote, "Fog gentle, lanterns patient, wishes traveling without shoes, one child, one cat, several good opinions. The sea carried everything safely." I closed the book and laid the pen across it, as if tucking it in. Before bed, I opened the window half an inch. The night came in like a shy friend and sat in the chair beside the table. I set a second cup of cocoa there, and though the night didn't drink, its presence was exactly the warmth I wanted to share. When I lay down, I felt the whole village around me, the harbor lights, the porch lamps, the line of lanterns practicing being stars, and the breath of the fog preparing to deliver what had been entrusted to it. I slept in the honest way a tide sleeps, out, then in, then out again, certain that morning would find the lanterns cool, the path rested, and the world arranged in its best approximation of kindness. If you were to walk the cliff in early light, you might find a star pattern pressed faintly into the bench slats, as if the night had decided to sign its work. You might find a shell beside a lantern where no one remembers placing it. You might see new footprints that start and end nowhere, the fog's handwriting practicing your name. You would certainly see that Willow Cove had once again kept its promise to guide everyone home, to let the light get loose, to teach even the narrowest bend how to be generous. And you would know, as I do, that next year's lanterns are already remembering their work, not as a burden, but as a soft, enduring joy. Dolce Halloween a tutti, che la luce delle lanterne vi accompagni nel sonno. Sweet Halloween to all. May the lantern light accompany you into sleep.